Not so much. Either they had a really good afternoon or a really bad afternoon. All right, we're going to finish up chapter 6 tonight, Lord willing, starting in verse 16. And so in the first few verses of chapter 6, remember this is, we've covered a lot of ground already in 5 chapters of Daniel's life. We decided he was probably in his early 80s at this point. And a lot of stuff has happened already, mostly in a different kingdom, a different king, different group of people that were against him and didn't like him and didn't like the others who would worship God, casting them into the fiery furnace and whatnot. But this is a whole different group. New king, new kingdom, new group of people around him. Same story though, right? Whole new group of people. Daniel still has the same excellent spirit within him. God is still moving on his side and influencing the king to like Daniel and to promote him, put him over the kingdom. He's an honest man. He's a good man. Righteous man, and the king can trust him, right? And so it's hard to find people that you can trust, especially when you're in a position of authority. If you can find somebody who you can trust, they're few and far between. And so these kings recognize that, and they put Daniel high into the kingdom. As a matter of fact, he was looking to put him head over the others. He'd already chosen to be one of 3 over the kingdom to watch out for everything, make sure that nobody was lying, stealing, and cheating. And so, of course, when you start keeping people from lying, stealing, and cheating, they're not going to like you very much because people like to lie, steal, and cheat. And that's what happened with Daniel. They found out they couldn't buy him, they couldn't scare him. He was always going to do his job and do it right. And so that was biting into their checkbooks and their lives. They didn't like it, making them look bad. I think we need to remember, that's one of the things that you're going to find as a Christian when you really try to live for the Lord. There are going to be a lot of people who aren't going to like it. That's going to hurt their feelings. It's going to make them feel bad. They're going to blame you for the guilt that they feel over their own sin. And they think, and then that's the world we live in right now, as they look around and they get so angry with Christians saying things like, forcing us to live by your rules and forcing us to think like you think. Of course, the Christians aren't trying to force anybody to do anything. But in their minds, it's the Christian culture. It's us that's causing them to feel guilty, and they don't want that. They want drugs to be legal. They want prostitution to be legal. They want to do and say and act any way they want us to do, say, and act. And not only do they want to be able to do it, but they want to be able to do it without guilt, without shame. And they see us as the source of that shame. Of course, we're not. God is. But they're going to call it on us. Remember, Jesus said if they hated him, they'll hate us too. They're going to see us. They can't get to him, right? So they're going to take it out on his people. And so we can be ready for that and watch out for that. This was happening even all the way back with Daniel, and it happened with multiple groups of people, multiple kings, multiple kingdoms. Same story over and over. They made a plot against Daniel. They said there's nothing we're going to be able to find about him unless we find something wrong with him according to his worship of his God. So that's exactly what they did, is they came up with a plan for premeditated murder to trick the king into making a proclamation, a law that nobody could pray to any god or ask any petition of anybody except of the king, knowing that Daniel would ask petition of his God because he did 3 times a day, every single day, for years and years and years and years. And we talked about that last time, why he did that, because he believed the promise of God when God said that he would hear the prayers that were being prayed by his people in bondage toward Jerusalem. And so he did exactly what God told him to do in the scriptures, because he believed the promises of God. We must, Christians, believe the promises of God. When we look into the scriptures and we see that God has made a promise, do not say that was that years. He could have said Deuteronomy was years ago. He said, no, a promise of God is a promise of God. Listen, Christians, a promise from God is a promise from God, whether it was 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 years ago. And we can count on it. And so we must trust that, as Daniel trusted, and he refused to not worship his God for 30 days. And so they got him. They watched him bend a knee to God. They went before the king. The king realized that he had made a mistake. He realized they had made a fool of him. We talked about last time that they're taking a pretty good chance here. The king would not have liked being made a fool of, but that's how bad they hated Daniel, right? They hated Daniel bad enough that they were willing to risk making a fool of the king and making him angry. The king tried to do something about it, couldn't figure out how he could do anything about it. But remember, he is the king, right? And kings break rules all the time if they want to. This was the law of the land. But he would had to, he couldn't do it and save face, right? So the idea was that he had made this proclamation, and the king is above everybody else. He's too smart to make a proclamation that isn't true. And to go back on this, even though he wanted to, he'd have to admit, I'm no smarter than all the rest of you. And that would have caused him problems. But there's a man's life that he actually cares about at stake. And guess who he chooses to go with and what he chooses to do? Well, verse 16, then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. And so when faced with this dilemma, I don't really want to kill Daniel. I like Daniel. He's been faithful in service. He's the best man I've got. But what's done is done. Cast him into the den of lions. And the king spake and said to Daniel, stopped him at the edge of the execution, and said to him, thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. You know, this is what we're supposed to be about as Christians, aren't we? We're supposed to be living a life where people who don't believe like we do look at us and say, there's something different about you. I don't know that I believe in your God, but boy, if there's anything to this, then he's going to save you because you serve him continually. You're always doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're always praying to him. You're always telling people about him. You're always honoring him and praising him. The king recognized that. And he said, now, I'm not going to save you. I've tried, but I'm not going to stick my neck out any further. But you've been serving this God continually, and you know, I think that he probably knew some of the history in this. I think Daniel had probably told him about it or something because of the way he talks about Daniel's God later on. And so he probably knew that God had delivered Daniel from this other kingdom and this other king before. And so he says, your God that you serve continually, he will deliver you. And then a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his signet and with the signet of his lords. You know, I think that's probably a very unusual thing if you think about it. This was an execution. You can imagine that most of the time when they execute somebody by throwing them into the den of lions, they stood at the edge of the den of lions while the lions killed them, right? And that is an execution. You throw them in, they kill them, you go on about your business, the guy is dead. This didn't happen. Probably very unusual, right? I mean, it doesn't sound normal to throw somebody into the dens of lions to execute them. Stand there and watch. You know, all these people wanted him dead. You know, they're standing over looking, thinking he's going to be dead immediately. And they stand there, and they stand there, and they look, and they say, here, kitty, 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 right? Here's, you know, everything they could do. But Daniel's not dead. And the lions are showing no aggression to him. And so, in the end, they finally get tired of watching, and they just put a big rock over it and seal it and say, don't nobody come. We're going to leave him here until the lions get hungry. But we're tired of watching. You know, that probably took a minute, right? And you imagine how disappointed these poor folks were. This was not working out like they thought it would work out. And they're probably getting a little nervous. Because remember, they've risked something with this. And they know they have. So they put the stone on it to make sure he couldn't get out. And I expect Daniel had friends. Daniel did a lot of things for a lot of people. A lot of people liked him. They probably may have been a little bit worried that if the lions didn't hurry and get him, somebody might come along and pull him up out of there, right? And so they put a stone over it, and they set a guard, and they said, all of us have agreed that we're not going to let him out of there until the lions have done their job. And that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. They wanted him to be executed. That was the purpose. The purpose was Daniel's death, and they didn't want that to be changed. But it's amazing how God can change things that folks don't want changed, isn't it? And he changes all kinds of things. He changes circumstances. But you know what he changes? Probably the hardest thing that he changes that people don't want to be changed, he changes hearts. And people don't want their heart changed. They would refuse to even acknowledge that they need their heart changed. Yet God changes hearts all the time. He can, does, and will, and we must trust him to do just that. And he's changed these circumstances here. That they said, all of our wills together, all of us getting together, we're going to put our signet on this, and we don't want this to be changed, but God changes it. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. He went completely out of his comfort zone, out of what he was used to. This was bothering him. He apparently liked Daniel. I think Nebuchadnezzar liked Daniel. I think they had respect for him because of the kind of man he was, the excellent spirit that he had, the honesty that he displayed. And so he went back to his palace, and he fasted through the night. He didn't even eat supper, didn't even bring the music in, and he couldn't sleep. So he truly, this was not, he wasn't putting on a show. He truly was not happy that this has happened. But he wasn't willing to stick his neck out either, right? I'm just going to throw one thing out there about that is you can't depend on this world to stick their neck out for you. No matter what you've done for them, no matter how much you think they like you, how much they may genuinely like you, in the end, you can't expect folks to stick their necks out for you. The only one that truly you can depend on day and night and all the time is God. He truly is the only one. Now, we should be able to depend on each other in the church, family. There are people we should be able to depend on, but the only one we absolutely surely can depend on is God. And we got to trust him. And he's the only one who truly has the power to do what he says he'll do. Now, I might have all the intention in the world of protecting somebody, but I may not be man enough to do it, right? There are things beyond my control. And even me as a husband and father, I can give my life to protect them, but I can't promise that I can protect them from everything because there are things that are out of my control. Lots of things that are out of my control. So I have to depend on God, not just to protect me, but to protect them. Protect other people that I love. Always depending on God. And so his sleep went from him, and then the king arose early in the morning, got up early, and ran to the den of lions. Now, again, this is the king. This is the guy that's over everything. He's worried about what people think of him because he went ahead and threw Daniel into the den of lions, but after all night, he got up and ran. Well, this was not particularly kingly of him to get up and run to the den because he was worried about Daniel. And then he does something even less kingly. He runs up to the den, it says, and when he came to the den, he cried in a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? He cried out in a lamentable voice to a dead man. That probably is not what people expected him to do as the king, right? To run up to the execution where the stone has been on the den and all the lions are in there with Daniel. And he goes running up there and he hollers out and asks, are you all right? At this point, he's not nearly as worried about what people think of him, is he? He shouldn't have been worried about it before. But he cries with a lamentable voice to Daniel, there is still some hope here. You see that? Again, what is it about Daniel that give Darius some hope? Because he wouldn't have had any hope in himself. I wonder how many people Darius had executed and how many of them lived through it. I'd say 0. How many people had Daniel seen thrown to the lions? Very few have ever come through these things, right? We've seen that happen with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego with Nebuchadnezzar, and he learned a lesson. Darius wasn't there. I would say this, that again, that is what our purpose is in this life, right? That's why God leaves us here instead of taking us to heaven, is because he wants us to show people hope. Why we have hope. What is the hope that's in our life? Because other people need hope too, right? That is a huge deal for people around the world, is they're looking, and they are looking for some kind of hope. We are to show them that hope. Show them what it looks like to have hope in God, hope in Jesus, and then tell them where we get that hope from. Daniel did exactly that. This pagan king had some hope that Daniel's God had saved him from these lions. You know how much hope Darius would have had that his God would have saved him from the lions? Let's just kind of think about it a minute. I'd say Darius would have had almost no hope that his gods would have saved him from the lions. Same thing about Nebuchadnezzar. We're looking back and we're seeing these guys didn't have a lot of hope in their gods doing anything, right? They're good with doing away with prayer for 30 days because 30 days without prayer to their false gods didn't mean anything to them. But looking here and looking at Daniel, he runs to the execution and has hope that Daniel's alive. In other words, he had hope that Daniel's God was real. Think about what I'm saying. That's the hope the world around us needs to see in our lives. And I'm sad to say, a lot of people don't display that, right? And we need to try harder and harder each day to display that hope in our lives and show people that we don't ever give up hope in what our God can do. And then he calls him the servant of the living God. I see this. This is coming from Darius, the guy who has a bunch of gods, right? The guy who serves gods very much like Belshazzar's gods. I wonder, and maybe I'm taking it further than I should, but I wonder if when Daniel was made high up, he had earned by this time, after 80 years of God working in his life and doing miracles, that Daniel has told people, he said, well, what do you want to call your God? And he said, I want to call my God the living God. Right? I mean, does that make sense? Why would the king Darius be calling Daniel's God the living God? This almost goes straight back to what Daniel tells Belshazzar just before he's killed, that you're serving these guys that don't see or hear or know. In other words, you're serving a bunch of guys that's not alive, in contrast to my God who is alive. And now Darius is calling God the living God. And he says, thy God whom thou serve, again, you serve him continuously. He doesn't miss a day. He doesn't miss an hour. He always is serving his God. When it comes down to it, he's going to serve his God. And he wants to know, is he able to deliver him? And Daniel called to the king and said, O king, live forever. Well, a couple of things. First of all, the voice came. Daniel is alive. He's been thrown into the den. He's been left overnight. The rock is in place. The lions are there. They're hungry. Everything is there for him to be executed, but Daniel is alive. And he isn't even holding a grudge. Yes, again, Daniel not holding a grudge. I can imagine if it was me. Yeah, I'm in here. You know, I don't know that I'd be saying, "O king, live forever," showing respect and honor to the king after he threw me into the lion's den. Well, this is a man of God who is seeing the big picture here. He is seeing a picture that is hard for people to see. He is seeing a picture of a God who is sovereign and supreme and powerful and has saved him from these lions. And big picture, this is going to honor my God. Big picture. Y'all, we got to keep looking at the big picture as Christians. And he called out and said, King, live forever. My God has sent his angel and has shut the lion's mouth, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, I have done no hurt. He says God has sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth. I know that there are folks who look at things like this about angels and some of the things I said this morning about God saving us and protecting us and bringing us through. And some people say, well, you know, you're taking all this way too far. You know what? I don't believe for a minute. I don't think I'm taking it far enough. God does send his angels. If you don't believe that God sends his angels to protect us and to keep us, then you don't believe the Bible, because it's Bible. That his angels are around us. That he does send his angels to keep us and protect us. And just because we don't have the faith and our eyes are not open and we're not actually seeing physical angels coming in front of us, doesn't mean they're not there. There's a lot of things going on around us, brothers and sisters, that we aren't aware of. And we need to become more and more aware of, because we need to be living more and more in the Spirit. One of the reasons we're not aware of what goes on in the spirit world is because we live continuously in the flesh. The more we live in the Spirit, the more aware of spiritual things we'll become. And Daniel is very aware of spiritual things. He's very aware that God has sent his angel. It doesn't say that he saw the angel, although Daniel does see angels. It doesn't say here that Daniel saw the angel. He just knows that God sent his angel to protect him. And that's enough. The lions should have ate him. The lions didn't eat him. God shut their mouths. That's all I need to know. Again, think about that for us. This is happening. I didn't die. That's all I need to know. God protected me. God kept me. Because it's true. God sent his angel and he shut the lion's mouth. And it says, for as much as before him innocency was found in me. Now, some of the commentaries, you know, they want to make very sure that I don't think there's any, I don't get the idea here that Daniel is saying I'm a perfect man and I don't sin, so God protected me. No. He's saying that in this instance, I didn't do anything wrong. God knew I didn't do anything wrong, and God knew I didn't deserve to be executed, and he protected me. It's as simple as that. Just so we understand each other, That is not always the case. Sometimes Christians over the years have been unjustly persecuted and unjustly martyred and executed, and God did not choose to protect them, although God has saved many lives, even on the execution block, but not always. And so if it's that time, it's just that time. And Daniel, I don't think that God came and told Daniel before he was thrown into the lion's den, Daniel, don't worry, it's going to be all right. Because I think, here's the deal. Whether the lions had ate him or not, it was going to be all right for Daniel. And that's the big picture, isn't it? That's what Daniel is saying. Whether or not the lions eat me, it's going to be all right. And he also says this. He says, and I did what was right before God, but listen, it's not right that I should have had to, in the first place, choose between God and the king. You know? And we're put in that place sometimes too. And he said, I didn't do anything to you, king. I had no ill will towards you. It wasn't right for you to put me in a position where I had to choose between my faith and the government. And y'all, it's again, it's not right for our government to put us in a position where we have to choose between faith in God and the laws of the land, but they do that. Just know that no matter what happens, we are to serve God in those instances. And we've been talking about that some already lately. And he said, I didn't do any hurt to the king. I didn't do anything really wrong against you either. And then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take up Daniel out of the den. So, again, he truly was unhappy that he was having to execute Daniel, and he was truly glad that his God saved him. And so they took him up out, and so Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him because he believed in his God. They didn't fight him. It wasn't he didn't get thrown into the den and he picked up rocks and he was like who am I thinking of? Samson, and whooped all the lions. It wasn't a fight. He just probably lay down in the den and took a nap. He didn't fight the lions. God closed the lion's mouth. There was no manner of hurt found on him, not a scratch. And what does it say? It says there was no hurt on him because he believed in his God. Again, faith. You say there's no faith in the Old Testament? Well, Hebrews would beg to differ. Faith was all through the Old Testament, and even right here it is, right here in black and white, God saves because of faith. Faith. Not even because of innocency. Daniel didn't do things that were wrong, but not because of the law, not because of consequences, not because of what might happen to him. He didn't do the things that were wrong because of his faith in God. See, that's the balance. That's what, for years and centuries, people have been fighting over this idea of the law and faith, the law versus faith. And Paul says there's nothing wrong with the law. It's a good thing. But it doesn't save you, because the law is full of good things. It tells you don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And it even puts consequences to it. Not necessarily a bad thing. It teaches us something, that there's consequences for sin. But the true reason, it doesn't do you any good to not break a law because you're scared you're going to get put in jail. The only thing that truly does you any good is if you don't break a law because you love God by faith. And so this all happened, this was all possible because he had faith in God. And the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions. Them, their children, their wives, and the lions had the mastery of them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. And so this wasn't an unusual thing. We see it's a very cruel thing to execute not just the ones who have committed the crime, but their families along with them. That wasn't an uncommon thing in those days. Only thing I guess I will say about that is something that is sort of fallen by the wayside in our country with the idea of marriage and family and those kinds of things, is being a little more careful about who you marry, right? Being careful about, because we've gotten to where a lot of folks in this country are not real careful about who they marry. They're more worried about looks than they are godliness. Things like that. Well, I mean, let's just kind of think about it. If you saw the big picture and you realized you were going to have to suffer because of the ungodliness of your spouse, and you saw things that way, would you be maybe a little more careful who you married? Probably so. It's something to think about, and it was something that happened back then. And y'all, in truth be told, there is a lot of suffering when we don't choose the right person. When God is not there in the middle of it, we're not asking Him for the right person, and we're not looking for that godly person to make our lives with. There is a lot of suffering, and people do suffer because of it. I'll throw this out there, and I say it pretty often, and I hope we all understand it. This is not about anybody in particular, but here's the thing. If we are careful about saying these things, it's not about hurting anybody's feelings, but we've got young people who need to hear, don't do that. That's not the right way to go. And so I do think that we've got to continue to say what is right and what is wrong in the church, especially for the generations coming up. And for those who need to hear it, they need to hear it. And so he threw all of them, the whole families, into the den, and the lions killed them before they ever hit the bottom. Now that's probably a lot more like what usually happened, right? They threw them in, and before they could even hit the ground, the lions had killed them, and the execution had taken place. They took a terrible risk. They hated Daniel enough that they were willing to risk this, and it really came back to bite them. Judgment is a scary thing. People want to say, oh, we don't want to think about judgment. We don't want to think about a God who would allow judgment. I'm just telling you, this is just the way it really is in the real world, in the real life. There is judgment, and judgment is harsh. The wages of sin is death. Always has been, always will be. And the only way out of that is the blood of Jesus. So they tore them to pieces before they hit the bottom. And then King Darius wrote unto all the people, nations, languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. Sounds similar to something I've heard before. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. So God is honored in a pagan land full of people who worship false gods. And I think we just need to remember too, these children of Israel are in bondage in a foreign kingdom. But when they were not, remember that was what their purpose was, is to spread the word about the living God. To tell people that God is real, that God is living, that God is good, and all these gods of everything else that all the Gentiles around them were worshiping are not worth a hill of beans. And they were not doing their job. And while they had their houses and everything was going good and God was blessing them, they forgot the Lord their God themselves and began to worship the false gods. They were not spreading the word. And now they've gone into bondage. And I wonder how many more people in the Babylonian and the Medes and Persian Empire throughout an entire Gentile empire, nations all over that known world at the time, are now hearing about the one true living God who actually does stuff. Not the one that you pray for it to rain for 6 months and you just wait and wait and wait and wait and wait and then a cloud comes up because God sends the rain. And people knew that, right? I mean, I have to believe that these people worshiping these false gods knew in their hearts that they were false, that they truly were not doing anything. But Daniel's God actually did do things. And this was being broadcast throughout the known world at the time, that people are to fear and tremble at the one true and living God. Darius says that is different from our gods because this God actually does stuff. This God is actually alive. This God is in the moment. This God sees in the moment that I'm throwing his servant into the den of lions, and he shuts the lions' mouths. He's not sending messengers from Mount Olympus to figure out what's going on. Daniel's God is in the moment. He is living amongst us. He's watching, and he's powerful, and he does things. He delivers. And he's the living God, steadfast forever. And you think maybe he asked Daniel what maybe I ought to say about your God? He sounds like Daniel's words. And his kingdom shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. Remember that these next couple of chapters, 7 and 8, the prophecy happened before this. So Daniel's got prophecy in his head about what's going to happen in the later days. Even though he's not real sure about what it all means, but he knows enough to know that his God is going to have dominion forever. And he delivers and rescues. Here's a God who actually does something. Again, in contrast to all of y'all's gods who don't do things, right? Look at this. Look at the way he says this. This had to be hard to say. He grew up worshiping all these false gods. But this God is different. This is a God who delivers in the moment and rescues. And he works signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And if you notice, Daniel prospered no matter where he went. And we're not talking about prospering just monetarily. He turned down money. He turned down positions. He's put in positions. He doesn't steal. He doesn't take anything that doesn't belong to him. He's not prospering worldly nearly as much as people would think he is. But where he's prospering is in godly things. His mind is on God and godly stuff, and in his own life and his own personal walk, and becoming this person with this excellent spirit about him, and people being able to see God in him and God's ways in him. He's prospering in his spirit. Remember, Daniel just as soon not have all that stuff. He'd just as soon not have the golden chain and high positions. When he was put in a position, he used it for God. But he'd just as soon not have it. I'm telling you, where he's prospering is in godliness before the eyes of God. And he prospered through a lifetime. For 70 years, he's been prospering. And before that, I'm sure. But even in a foreign land where everybody wanted to kill him, God was for him, so it didn't matter who was against him. And Daniel prospered. All right. Y'all's turn.